Okay, so I just want to show you this power box that I built for, this is for power outage and just disaster preparedness and that kind of thing. This is primarily intended to charge cell phones, lanterns, batteries, ham radios, and things like that that I may want to charge during an extended power outage. It also has a small inverter in it. I'll show you that to be able to power rechargeable power tools. It's not intended to be a generator replacement. I have a large generator for the house that can run the well pump and the septic pump and all the lights in the house and that kind of stuff, but I don't intend to run that full time. During a power outage, I would just turn it on a few times a day to cool the fridge off and run the septic pump and the well and that kind of thing, and then keep it off for the rest of the day, and then just use this. And so the large generator is converted to propane. I've got a large propane tank, so I can continue to run that for quite a while. But I for sure didn't want to use the generator to run my CPAP. That needs to run all night long, and I don't want that big generator running. So this is intended to power that. I also wanted this to be renewable, so rechargeable with solar, so that in a really extended outage, I'd have a way to charge it back up. I can always, plug it in and charge it while the generator's running, but I wanted a way to be able to recharge it with solar too. Last year, I built a portable solar array. It's two 100-watt panels that fold together in kind of a briefcase style design. I bought that for use with our Airstream when we're dry camping. I could just plug it into the side of the trailer, and there's a solar controller built in, and it charges up those batteries. Well, I wanted to be able to charge those plug those portable solar panels into this box and recharge the box. So the overall design is it's a Harbor Freight XL case. It's about $60. You can get it for $45 with a coupon. Just huge value in terms of the quality of the case. It's a 3-layer design. It's got on the bottom layer, it's got lithium batteries and all the wiring. On the mid layer, it's got the outlets mounted, and then on the top it's got a lid. I'll show you a few things on the outside and then I'll open it up. Let me just tip it up to make it a little easier to see here. There's certain functions that I wanted to be able to use from the outside just while the case was closed and sitting on the ground. So one of them, this one right here, I have 2 sets of Powerpole connectors. The yellow and white is a solar panel input, so this can be sitting on the ground, and I just plug in my solar panels directly right to this input, and it'll charge the box without having to have it open and exposed to the environment. And then I have a Powerpole outlet right above here. I can pull 40 amps out of here to power any of the things that I want to charge. And this is also where I plug in the charger. When the case is just in storage, I have a CTEK Charger that I would plug in here and charge the case while it's just closed. Next to it, I have a 12-volt outlet. This is primarily to be able to plug in my CPAP at night, so that this can be sitting on the floor next to my bed, but I just have a 12-volt cigarette lighter cable for my CPAP. And then this next to it is has a USB and a USB-C outlet, and as well as a voltage indicator. The voltage indicator I primarily wanted just to be able to verify that the case was charging and that kind of thing. So these are all reasonably weather resistant. I wanted to try to keep the case as watertight as I could. It's not fully waterproof as in submersible, but it's pretty darn water resistant. I have a main breaker on the outside, and I've used the rubber gasket around that. And this main breaker I can also use to turn the box off. You can see that the voltage gauge turns off. So this is a 120 amp breaker, and also is the main shutoff. But I've siliconed all the connections and that kind of thing. I wasn't going to originally do this, but I decided to add this high current SB50 Anderson outlet to it, just to be able to power either a box expansion that I'll talk about a little bit later, or an external power inverter. So I've added that. But the whole box is, I've sized the wire inside the box to be able to support basically pulling 100 amps out of this connector. This is 6-gauge wire. So there's no other penetrations anywhere on the box in terms of places where water could get in or that kind of thing. Flip it down, I'll go ahead and open it up. So then on the inside, kind of looks like that. I'll kind of go around on the inside. Basically, as I mentioned before, it's a 3-layer design, and I want to show you on the one of the things that's just really important as you start planning these things out is just how everything's going to fit and not interfere with each other. So on my original design here, Originally I'd planned to put the CTEK charger inside the box, but really, I mean, if the power is out, the charger is going to be out of the box or the charger is going to be left at home, so I didn't put that in there. But I've got my breakers, all these outlets. I've got some circuit breakers here on my design, and then these things that plug into the 12-volt outlets. Plan this out, and then on the exact same scale, be able to plan what happens down below, underneath the floor, so that these dotted lines, you can see that's where the circuit breakers and the outlets that are on this drawing down here are going to stick down into the floor. So you need to leave a space in the middle, and these are the things that are in the front of the box that are extending into the box. So you need to allow for these recesses to poke down into here. And so in the bottom of the box, which I'll show later in the video, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lithium batteries. I've got a positive and negative bus, and I've got some blocks glued into the box that basically hold the batteries in place, as well as allow me to screw the lid down. But being able to hold these up one next to each other and make sure that you're not going to get any interference. And also when you plan the lid, if there's things like this solar controller that are going to extend down, that are deeper than the lid, to be able to plan where they're going to end up in the floor. And I'll show you some of those features here. But as we go through the inside of the box, this is the floor here that I've mounted. It's 1/4 inch ABS. I've used that to mount all the circuit breakers and the outlets. I mentioned below there's 5 10 amp Dakota Lithium 12-volt batteries, so I've got a 50 amp hour capacity here in total, and the battery's arranged in kind of an end position. There's 2 on this side, 1 across the back, and 2 across this side. The floor is screwed down. You can see these screws here that mount to those posts that I was just showing you on the drawing. There's 4 cigarette lighter outlets here, and these can all be used. These are just in storage here in this foam. This foam came with the box, but these can just be pulled out and inserted in whatever slots you want to use. I went with the cigarette lighter outlets and the separate chargers just because as technology changes or ports change on these, like now everything's going to this USB-C, that I can just replace these. But really the cigarette lighter outlet hasn't changed in forever. So these can be replaced. I can go all USB-C or USB micro or anything else in there. So there's 4 12-volt outlets. These 2 are on a 20 amp circuit breaker. These 2 are on a 20 amp circuit breaker. And then I've got 2 built-in USB outlets here. I know that goes against my what I was saying about building in the USB outlets, but this really, primarily I use it for this light. And so this, I'll just pull this out of here and plug it in here and go like this. And then when I touch the top of it, it's a little tough to see in the daylight, but it allows me to plug in the light directly without doing anything else. This uses very little power. Then right next to that over here, I've got another set of these power poles. I've got 2 sets of them. Those are on a 40 amp breaker, so I can pull 40 amps out of either this set or 40 amps total. And then I have another, this is the 40 amp circuit breaker that runs the Powerpole outlet on the front of the box that I showed you. I have a 50 amp circuit breaker that turns off everything in this box, so that I can just turn off everything with one switch and make sure that nothing's drawing any power. And then you just flip the lever to turn it back on. The power inverter that I used back here is a pure sine wave 300 watt. I've protected that with a 40 amp circuit breaker here. This inverter does draw 0.9 amps when it's on and idling, and so I put a circuit breaker so that I could be able to push the button and completely turn it off. What I didn't know when I ordered the inverter is that it already has a power switch on the back of it, and turning off the power switch does turn off all the power to it. So I could have just gone in retrospect with a normal kind of a button style 40 amp circuit breaker here and saved maybe 15 bucks over getting this one that, you know, has the shut off. But, you know, I didn't know that at the time. Normally on these inverters, it's a 300 watt inverter. It's going to pull like 30 amps out of it comes with a cigarette lighter socket on it. There's no way you can pull 30 amps out of a car or cigarette lighter. You know, you're going to have a, 10 amp plug in your car or something like that. So as soon as this gets over about 100 watts or so, it's just going to blow the fuse in your car. But in here, I'm only using about a foot of the cord. I've cut off the cut off the cigarette lighter end, and it's wired directly into the batteries and this circuit breaker here, so I can get the full 300 watts out of that with no problem. It also has 2 USB outlets on the front of it. So then moving around the box, originally I was going to put the CTEK Charger over here on this side, but then decided just to keep that out of the box. And so right now I've just got a battery charger in here. This can take AA's or like 18650s, 21700s, any of those. And I just keep the cord for it up here in the lid. These little, I'll just take this out of here so I can show you, it's pretty easy to get things in and out. These are Velcro and stretchy. So really anything that I want to put in here, it's just very easy to secure it down with these. I'll reattach that later. This cord over here has the SB50 connectors on both ends so that I can plug that in to this outlet on the outside of the box. And then I have one of these outlets on the back of my truck. And I've got a canopy on there. And so I can plug one end into the box while it's sitting inside under the canopy and plug the other side in at the bumper of the truck and use the car's alternator to charge the box just while I'm driving. That was the primary intent of this. This over here I have the exact same. I've got an SB50 plug and alligator clips. So I can use this to, if I did have a dead battery on my car or my truck, be able to jump start the battery. I don't think you could plug it in and just immediately jump start the car, because you're either going to trip this 120 amp circuit breaker on the front, or you're going to trip the protection that's built into the batteries. But you could plug this into your dead battery and let it charge for 5 minutes, probably transferring, 100 amps or, a huge amount of power to your car battery, and just wait 5 minutes, maybe even disconnect it, and then start the battery or start the car. But I just thought, for very little money, adding some alligator clips and some wire and a connector just gives the box, a little more capability. I talked about this foam. This whole thing is removable, if I need to. This is a splitter for my Powerpole connectors. And so I can use this cable up here that's in the lid that has power poles on both ends to be able to plug in one end either here inside the box or here outside of the box on the other outlet, and run that out. And then I have got 3 more power poles that I can use for battery chargers and that kind of thing. So I keep that in here. So right up here on the lid, I've mounted these. These are just got off Amazon. They're called Cocoon, and they're just it's a stretchy material that you can put basically whatever you want in there. These ones are the small size, and this one's extra small. But I just find them pretty versatile for being able to hold cords and stuff like this. I've got a short, I think this is a 10-foot power cord with it's got a swivel plug on the end, and so I can plug that into the end of the inverter down here and then get power out of the box. This is the short, I think this is a 10-foot 12 gauge wire with the power poles on the end of it. This is a Morningstar. It's just a PWM solar controller that I already had. It was in the trailer. I upgraded to an MPPT charge controller in there, so I just already had this, and so I mounted it. So it's basically taking the input from the solar panels in the front of the box is wired in here. I'll just take this cover off. Input from the solar panels is wired in here, and then it's going back out to the battery and just allowing you to charge the battery when it's sunny outside. I'm not using the load terminals on here because this is limited to 30 amps, and I've got more going on than that. And then right below that, I just kind of made a box out of ABS to be able to mount this little Drock controller here. And this is going to show the battery voltage. It's also going to show how many amps you're drawing. Like right now I'm drawing 0.8 amps. That's just the inverter idling with nothing plugged into it. But it's going to show that I've got 50 amp hours battery capacity, but I got 38 amp hours remaining. The battery's at 77%. This meter has a lot of other functionality. It can run relays and solenoids and that kind of thing. And you can set different power protection levels and overload levels and that kind of thing, low voltage levels. I'm not using any of that functionality. I'm just using it for a voltage meter and battery capacity and amp meter. So I just kind of made an ABS little box to be able to mount this, and a little piece of ABS plastic that I've mounted on top of the box, and then cut a hole for this meter. This light generally stores back in here. We won't put that back in there for right now. Over here I've got the cord right here that I store that goes for the battery charger, and I've just got a couple of phone cords right here now, but there's room for kind of 8 or 9 phone cords and charging cables in all this area here. So this charge controller doesn't have a lithium setting on it, but there's one of the AGM settings that's very close for lithium batteries that doesn't have the equalization stage and all that. So it's you might not get the very, you might not top off the batteries with that charger, but it's going to get them very close, and it's certainly not going to damage the batteries. And I talked about the Drock meter. It just the amperage is measured with a Hall sensor that's down below, so it can really handle very high amperage. I've pulled basically 100 watt or 100 amps out of this connector before using my inverter, and it works just fine. I'll just show you some of the things that I intended to plug in here. One of the things is I'm going to go over to for a power outage. Like I said, I have a generator that I can use for the house, but we don't intend to run the generator the whole time, just for lack of fuel and because of noise and that kind of thing. So I'll run it sporadically, and then our lighting solution is basically these Streamlight lights. I've got 6 of these small ones that take 3 AA batteries each, and I've got 3 of these larger ones. These are called a Super Siege, I believe. I've got 3 of these that are rechargeable. And so, the idea would be to run these at night. The idea is to take this box outside, plug it in with the solar panels, allow it to recharge all day long. I can pull I should get in full sun between 10 and 12 amps out of my 200 watts worth of solar panels, somewhere around there. And it's a 50 amp hour battery, so 4 or 5 hours of full sunlight would fully recharge this box. But basically, I'd put the box and the solar panels outside in the sun during the day, and then when it gets dark, you're not benefiting from the sun anymore, so bring the box inside and recharge all these things, and then run my CPAP all night, and then put the box back outside the next day. So when the box, we'll be using these at night, probably not all at the same time, but they come with an AC adapter to be able to charge them up from the house power. Well, this AC adapter puts out 12 volts, and so what I've done is basically just cut this cable. I've put power poles back on it, so you can connect them back together and still use the AC charger if I want to. I generally just charge them off at 12 volts, and I just throw all these in a drawer in case I want to use them later. But for these lanterns, you would just, for example, plug it right back into the box and plug in there, and then it'll recharge the lantern just like so. And again, I can use this Powerpole extension cord. I have one of these rig runner extensions, and so I could plug the power pole into the outside of the box, put it into the DC in on this rig runner, and I could have 5 more power poles that I can charge AA batteries, lanterns, ham radios, anything else that I want to use. And so this is just another way to expand how many things I can charge at once. This is the cable. I didn't bring the solar panels in themselves, but this is the cable that I used for the solar panels. I used color-coded. I kind of standardized on the yellow and white. For that basically means solar voltage. So this would plug into the front of the box, and then the other end would plug into my solar panels. So I have a short and a long version of these cables. This is the CTEK Charger that I got. This is the version that's for charging lithium batteries. I have several of these CTEK things. Are just absolutely fantastic chargers for the cars, but this one has a charging algorithm for the lithium batteries. And it comes with a battery terminal plug-in. You can use several different things. You can put a cigarette lighter on here or whatever else. I took the battery terminal plug-in and I cut off the battery loops and put power poles on there, and so that this can just plug in to the outside of the box just like that when the box is closed, and I can just keep this on all the time. This can be just left on permanently and keep the box at full charge until the power goes out. But I can also disconnect this right here and use this for other things if I, ever have some other appliance that has lithium batteries. These are the battery chargers that I'm using. Miboxer or something. I don't know how exactly you say that name. But I've done the same thing on those. They'll come with a 120 volt, house power plug-in. I've cut off the end of it and put the power poles on here. And so you'll plug those in either to the front of the box, on the inside of the box, or using that cord to get the power out of the box, to plug it into one of these outlets on my rig runner and do it just like that. I'll go ahead and plug this in just so you can see. This will basically light up. This will charge 8 AA's. I've got 2 of them actually, and so I can charge 16 AA's at a time, and you can also charge 18 650s or 21 700s or combinations of AA's and those batteries at the same time. So I'll use these for battery chargers. And then the last thing is, I mentioned the inverter. So this inverter I keep in my truck, and it's a 1,000 watt pure sine wave inverter. And so I've got, as I mentioned, one of these outlets on the bumper of my truck, and so I can plug this into my truck and have 1,000 watts of power, anytime when I'm driving. Well, I can use this same inverter and just plug it, right into the front of this box, like so. And now I've got a 1,000 watt inverter, but I don't have to carry it around all the time in the box, and it makes it a little bit more. It's still not, super high power, high capacity battery bank like some of the Kodiaks and that kind of thing, but gives me the capability to use a higher wattage inverter if I want to, and I've already got this. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the capacities. What can I run with this? AA batteries, it's a 600 watt hour capacity, 50 amp hours at 12 volts. So I can charge 168 AA batteries on one charge of the box. I could charge 48 iPhones, 8 MacBooks. I could charge these lanterns 13 times, and I can run my CPAP for 20 hours. Not all of that at the same time, obviously. But if I just sort of go through, well, if I'm going to use my CPAP, whatever, 7 hours a night, and I'm going to charge enough batteries to run all those lanterns, and I'm going to recharge one of those stream lights each night or something like that, and recharge my phone and recharge my MacBook, I can get about 2 days without charging the box at all. And I would put it outside each day, just kind of no matter what the weather is, and harvest as much sun as I could, as well as I can charge the box whenever I'm running the generator and that kind of thing. So, I mean, being careful with how I use it and making sure that I charge it every day and that kind of thing, could provide charging, communications, cell phones, and light, almost indefinitely. The last couple things I was going to talk about on the box was just a couple of the products that I thought were super helpful when building it that I hadn't used before. Those are right over here. One of them is if you're going to glue anything to this box, I think it's polypropylene or something like that. I forget what the chemical composition of the plastic is, but I'm using ABS and polypropylene. Is this right here, Loctite for plastic bonding system. This stuff works fantastic. I'd never used it before, but most super glues and epoxies and that kind of thing will not stick to this material. It's a very kind of a waxy, greasy type of plastic, and it just will not stick. And so this basically has an activator, which is kind of like a Sharpie. You'll put some of this on wherever you're going to glue. You're going to wait 1 minute, and then you put on this super glue type material and then bond the two together, and it just absolutely sticks like crazy. So I went through a few tubes of this building the box. The other thing that I'd point out is this 3M dual lock. This is a Velcro type material that's just self-adhesive, but it doesn't come with kind of a male and female. It basically sticks to itself. It just snaps together and really holds pretty well. And I used that to mount the inverter down because I didn't want to drill any holes in the inverter or anything, but that thing is really stuck on there. So I used it to hold that down, and I also used it to bond these panels to the roof of the box. And I really found that it worked really well. And if you really want it to stick, then this is the trick. 3M adhesion promoter. These come in just single reusable packets like this. You can order, you know, I just keep a bunch of them in the shop, because any type of stick-on adhesive like this 3M dual lock that's on the back of this, this activates the adhesive that's on here and just absolutely bonds it like crazy. So if you really want something to stick on any project where you're using kind of a double-sided tape or something like that, this 3M adhesion promoter, I'd give that a shout out. So kind of final thoughts. I think the only thing that I would change if I was, you know, doing this again, you know, I don't know that it needs this extra 50 amp breaker here. I've got a 120 amp main breaker down here, and everything else is fused, you know, individually with these breakers. I really don't know that it needs this, but it's an extra few bucks. I don't know if I would put that in it again if I was doing it. And I mentioned earlier this 40 amp breaker here, I'd probably just do a button breaker, save about 15 bucks and a little bit of space, and just rely on the switch that's on the inverter, because it does seem to shut all the way off. Otherwise, I wouldn't change much else. I'd build it the same. I may build an expansion box. You could use this one size down from this, the large Harbor Freight box, and put PVC battery cells in it, so you don't have the big battery cases. But I've kind of got a design for one of those where I can do 7 of the 20 amp batteries in there, so I'd have 140 amp hour capacity lithiums, and they would basically stand up vertically. And that box, the only thing I would put is on the outside of it. I'd put a main breaker like this with a shutoff, and I'd put one of these Anderson SB50s, and then you would basically just use this cable to connect the two boxes here and the same connector on the other box, and then you're using all of the outlets and the solar charger and all the functionality of this box, but you've got the extra battery capacity of the other 140 amp hours that's in the other box. But I mean, it's a lot of batteries, and lithium batteries are not cheap, so it's, you know, an $800 expansion box. So I may or may not build that, but that gives you the capability with this big high power connector on here. So there's not a lot else I would do different. I think it turned out pretty good. I think it's going to be pretty useful. So I took a video of the box before I screwed the bottom down, just so you can see some of the wiring. It's a little bit of a mess, but that'll give you an idea of kind of what goes on below the floor here. Okay, this is just going to be a quick video. I just wanted to show the wiring that I did below the false floor here before I screw the lid down kind of once and for all. So it's a bit of a mess down here, but I didn't spend a lot of time making it pretty since this is all hidden. But if I raise this up, you can basically see that well, you can't really see. I use 10 gauge wire to each battery, and so I would run from the positive to each battery, and I basically made a positive distribution block here. I took, it looks a little messy, but I took a Blue Sea 4-post block. I cut it in half because I wanted 2 posts for the positive and 2 posts for the negative, and then I basically just glued them down to the bottom of the box. And these zip ties, because I had to cut the cover in half, it doesn't really snap on in place anymore, but now with these zip ties on there, it holds it down and covers the bare terminals. But each of the positives on each battery runs back here all the way around. It's all 10 gauge wire connecting into here, and then there's a large 6 gauge cable coming out of here, goes back and through my hall sensor in the back to the front, and then onto the input side of my main circuit breaker. And then it's coming out of the circuit breaker into my high current outlet on the outside out here. And then I've got a line that basically goes up and feeds these 2 main circuit breakers, this one for the inverter and this one for everything else. And I've got pretty heavy gauge cable on that too, 12 gauge cable here. And then it goes from this main circuit breaker back down. I've got another smaller kind of screw terminal positive distribution block that, you know, it feeds this block, and then all the individual circuits come off of here and go up to their circuit breakers, comes out of the circuit breakers and goes into each individual outlet. And then same thing on the negative side. I basically come from the negative distribution block over here. I go over to this, from there over to this smaller terminal negative distribution block here, and then the negative side of each outlet is connected into that. So it's all, I use mostly silicone wire for the flexibility. The rest of it's marine grade terminals and that kind of thing. I ended up putting spacers in here on top of my batteries just to raise that floor up just a little bit more and give me a little bit more room for kind of all this wiring mess. Once this whole mess, which is actually pretty deep, once this fits down, you know, the design of it was to fit that down into the center here, but with all this wire, I needed to raise it up just a little bit more. And then you can see my posts here that I've basically made essentially kind of 1" by 1" ABS posts, glued them to the base, and then that's where my lid screws down to here. Got one here, one back here, and one back here. And so that gives me a way to fasten the lid down. The lid just pushes on these and basically holds all the batteries in place. These serve to keep the batteries from sliding around in the box as well. So that's the unsightly look of the bottom of it. It just takes very careful planning when you're putting this together to plan for where these can be and making sure that you leave space in the front of the box up here for your outlets that may poke through, so that you need to, you know, push the spacing of these, you know, create space in here for these outlets, and then take into account that your batteries are taking up, you know, big spaces on the sides and across the back, which is back here, and then there's batteries over here as well. So what space do you have remaining for outlets and circuit breakers to drop into, and how's all that going to work? It starts to get pretty tight. So a little bit messy, but again, this is not seen once you close it up, and I think it's all pretty solid in terms of things not coming loose or sliding around or you know, that kind of thing. You'll also see that there are things like this solar controller is deeper than the lid, and so it's going to need to borrow some space from the next level down, and so you just have to think about how is this thing going to close, and this basically need to fit in this open space here, and that's why this, I had to space this over just a little bit. It's not quite in the center. I had to move it over just a little bit, otherwise it hits these buttons on these breakers right here. But you need to put tall things where it can borrow space from the lid, and you know, this tall thing fits in this space. It borrows space here from the lid, and that will close even with that light stored there. The other thing that I'll mention about this box that I just remembered, everything about this box is great, except the way it comes, these latches will over-rotate into the box. They'll end up in here and way further in here. And so as you're trying to close it, you need 5 hands. You need one for each latch to be able to pull them out. And then you need one to kind of close the lid. And so what I did was glue these little blocks of ABS. It's just, you know, what is that, 1/8 of an inch or something like that. Use that glue that I just showed you and glue these blocks in each of the handles. And also these latches used to have teeth on them, which would really make it catch on the edge of the box. And so I sanded down these smooth so they make nice even ramps. And now when you go to close the lid, it just closes with no effort because the latches hit and it, you know, the ramps move the latches out of the way, and they're not all the way inside the box to where it can't, you know, where it's totally catching. But it closes up pretty easy, and you can use all 4 latches, and ended up a little bit heavier than I wanted. It kind of had a design weight of about 35 pounds. I think it's just over 40 somewhere with the extra wire and some of the cables and that kind of thing that I never accounted for. I'll put a link in the description for a lot of the stuff that's in the box. I don't think I'm going to put links for all the chargers and lanterns and all the accessories, but I'll put most of the stuff that I used in the box. So hopefully that helps you, and have a great day.